Somewhere in the Kattegat, February 2026, a Russian oil tanker turns off its transponder. The crew knows the route. They've done it dozens of times. 29 kilometers of water, lights off, no flag flying, and on the other side in the open Atlantic and $40 million in sanctioned crude nobody was supposed to know about. They didn't make it. This time the Danish Maritime Authority is waiting. They board the vessel. They check the papers. The insurance certificate comes back to a sanctioned Russian insurer. The cargo is Russian crude. The ship is detained. One tanker detained in a strait 29 kilometers wide. One country with a population smaller than the city of Houston just put a cork in a pipeline that funds Putin's entire war machine. About 60% of Russia's seaborne oil exports move through this exact stretch of water. Denmark controls both sides of it, and in 2026, Denmark just stopped playing nice. Let's start with a number that has no right to exist. Denmark has a population of 5.9 million people. That's roughly the size of Wisconsin. It has no oil revenues, no empire, no nuclear weapons, no permanent seat on the UN Security Council. And yet between January 2022 and the end of 2025, Denmark allocated 2.75% of its entire GDP to direct military aid to Ukraine, more than any other NATO or EU member relative to size. That figure comes from the Peterson Institute for International Economics. It's not a political talking point. It's the most rigorous accounting of military aid commitments done by any independent research body, and Denmark is at the top. France, a nuclear power with a permanent Security Council seat, came in below Denmark on this metric. The United States, the largest economy in human history, was outpaced by a country that makes more money from wind turbines than weapons. In early 2026, the Danish government added another $541 million in military aid for Ukraine, bringing the planned 2026 total to just under $2 billion, roughly 1.9% of GDP for that year alone, before even counting domestic defense spending. Here's where it gets creative. Part of that extra funding came from the sale of Denmark's old F-16s. Proceeds from retired jets sold to Argentina, $24 million aircraft that had already been paid for decades ago, went directly into Ukraine aid. Denmark monetized its own military history and handed the proceeds to Kiev. That's not a political gesture. That's logistics. Now let's talk about geography, because this is where Denmark becomes disproportionately terrifying. Russia exports oil by sea, a lot of it. The Baltic ports, Primorsk, Ust-Luga, push hundreds of tankers out every month. Those tankers have to pass through the Danish Straits, the Sound, the Great Belt, the Kattegat. Denmark sits at the exit of the Baltic Sea like a door. And in 2026, Denmark is the one holding the handle. In 2025 alone, Russian shadow fleet tankers were reported in Danish waters almost daily. 1 in 3 of them, by early 2026, carried insurance certificates from sanctioned Russian insurers. By February 2026, Russian warships had started escorting shadow fleet tankers through the Baltic, a formal policy announced by Moscow's Maritime Board because their tankers were being stopped. The Russian Navy escorting oil tankers in 2026. That is how badly the pressure from Baltic inspection regimes has rattled Russian logistics. Denmark's response was not to close the straits. Under international maritime law, that's not an option. Innocent passage rights mean even Russian-flagged ships can transit. What Denmark did was build a precision enforcement machine. Ships are inspected at anchor off Skagen, documentation is checked, insurance is verified. Vessels with safety defects or fake papers are detained. The process is slow, deliberate, and bureaucratically brutal, which is exactly the point. It costs Russia time, money, and the risk of cargo seizure on every single transit. About 175 tankers a month, moving through 29 kilometers of water that Denmark controls on both sides, every month. While all of this was happening, Denmark also had to deal with a different kind of pressure from its own ally. In January 2026, 2026, Donald Trump told NATO that the United States needed to control Greenland, not lease it, not partner on it, own it. He threatened a 25% tariff on Danish goods unless Denmark agreed. He told NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte in a message that leaked to the Norwegian Prime Minister that Greenland was non-negotiable. He called Denmark's military presence there 2 dog sleds. The actual Danish military presence in Greenland includes Arctic naval vessels, special forces units, surveillance drones, the serious dog sled patrol, which, yes, does involve actual dog sleds, and yes, they are special forces, and yes, you probably don't want to meet them, plus the Patuffik Space Base, which provides early warning for ballistic missile launches aimed at both North America and Europe. Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen's response to Trump, translated from diplomatic into plain English, was, "No, Greenland is not for sale, not for rent, and not for discussion." Foreign Minister Lars Løkke Rasmussen flew to Washington, sat across from J.D. Vance and Marco Rubio, described the talks as frank but constructive, and then stepped outside and said Denmark's position was unchanged. That is what constructive means in Nordic diplomacy. It means we were polite, and the answer is still no. Trump reversed his position at Davos on January 21st. He dropped the tariff threat. He agreed not to use force. The deal, if you can call it that, was that Denmark would increase its own military presence in Greenland and push NATO to establish a permanent Arctic mission, which it did. NATO launched Arctic Sentry in February 2026, following Baltic Sentry in January 2025 and Eastern Sentry in September 2025. Denmark didn't surrender an inch of territory. It accelerated its own Arctic buildup and turned Allied pressure into a NATO-wide Arctic security framework. The country that Trump called irrelevant walked out of that confrontation with more military hardware in Greenland and a formal alliance-level mission protecting its territory. And while that confrontation was happening, Denmark didn't pause. Here is what it was actually building, because the aid numbers are only half the picture. In October 2025, the Danish government announced a $13.7 billion defense spending plan. Not over a decade, not spread across a generation of incremental budget increases. A focused, accelerated procurement package designed to produce a deployable heavy brigade within years, not decades. The F-35 fleet is being expanded to 43 aircraft total. Denmark already has 15 operational, with the remaining 12 from the original 27 jet order arriving by end of 2026. The new buy adds 16 more, plus collaborative combat aircraft, the AI-guided unmanned wingmen that operate under F-35 tactical control. Denmark sold 19 of its F-16s to Ukraine, sold the rest to Argentina, and is replacing all of it simultaneously while spending 2% of GDP on someone else's war. The logistics of that alone should be quietly impressive to anyone who has ever tried to run a household budget. On the ground, 115 CV-90 Mark III infantry fighting vehicles from BAE Systems, deliveries running 2026 through 2029, plus 44 more on top of that, because the original plan to refurbish old CV-90s was scrapped. Denmark is not repainting old vehicles. It is buying an entirely new armored fleet. 4 Saab GlobalEye early warning aircraft, a brand new air defense wing at Skalstrup, and Patriot plus Iris-T batteries, a country that had essentially no serious ground-based air defense, is building one at speed. Then there's conscription. Denmark extended mandatory military service from 4 months to 11 months. Annual intake is rising from 4,700 to 7,500. Starting in 2027, women are conscripted on the same terms as men. Denmark is not the first NATO country to do this. Norway has had gender-equal conscription since 2015. But the timing is deliberate. The country is scaling its trained reserve, not just its equipment. And in March 2025, a drone training center opened in Odense, a $70 million facility specifically designed to produce drone operators at scale. 4 Estonian Themis unmanned ground vehicles and 4 British MFP-1 systems are being tested for integration into reconnaissance and infantry units. Denmark is not building a museum piece army. It is building the force it expects to need. Now step back and look at this from Moscow's side, because that's where the title earns itself. Russia Russia's Baltic fleet is headquartered at Kaliningrad. As of early 2026, it consists of 4 Staragushchi-class corvettes, 6 Buyanem missile corvettes, and a collection of aging submarines and support vessels. NATO analysts describe it as encircled. Finland and Sweden joined NATO. The Baltic is now a NATO lake, surrounded on nearly every shore. The fleet cannot reach the Atlantic without passing through waters that Denmark controls. It cannot reinforce Russia's other fleets in a crisis without transiting choke points monitored by Danish radar, Danish frigates, and Danish F-35s. What Denmark has built is not just a capable military, it is a geographic lock, a country positioned at the exit of the Baltic Sea, now armed, funded, and aligned with the will to use all of it. Russia is running oil through a strait Denmark controls, losing tankers to a bureaucratic enforcement machine it cannot legally fight. Russian artillery is being destroyed by shells funded with Danish money. Russian planners are looking at a Baltic exit they cannot pass through without Danish permission, and a Greenland they tried to take from an ally and failed. Every one of those problems is getting worse, not better. There is a running joke in Nordic defense circles that Denmark spent 30 years being the NATO member that showed up but didn't say much. The country that hosted the headquarters, trained alongside the Americans, voted correctly. And then when the summits ended, went home to eat pastries and win cycling races. That Denmark is gone. What replaced it is a country spending 3.5% of GDP on collective defense, conscripting its daughters, buying stealth jets, deploying AI-guided maritime surveillance against Russian tankers, and telling the President of the United States to his face that some things are not for sale. Russia doesn't have an answer for all of that simultaneously. A country of 5.9 million people has put itself into a position where Moscow has to care what Copenhagen thinks. That was not an accident. In September 2025, a Russian Ropucha-class landing ship, the Alexander Shabalin, anchored for days near Langeland at the southern entrance to Denmark's Great Belt Strait. Danish authorities recorded radar targeting and weapon pointing from the vessel. Around the same time, Denmark experienced multiple drone incidents that temporarily closed Billund Airport. These weren't accidents and they weren't coincidences. They were messages. Russia has severed undersea cables in the Baltic across 3 separate operations since 2023, more than 10 individual cables in total. The S-Link 2 power cable, the Baltic Connector gas pipeline, 5 communications cables cut by a single tanker dragging its anchor across the seabed. Denmark, sitting above the most critical cable routes connecting Northern Europe to the rest of the world, is now running maritime surveillance patrols specifically to intercept vessels behaving like the ones that cut them. Russia tried intimidation at Denmark's doorstep. Denmark responded by joining a JEF AI surveillance system called Nordic Warden, tracking shadow fleet vessels in real time across 22 monitored areas, including the Kattegat and the North Sea. The message Russia sent with a warship anchored off Langeland got a response in the form of an automated threat detection network covering the entire approach. Denmark's defense agreement runs through 2033. The spending is locked in, the procurements are contracted, the conscripts are being trained, the straits are being watched. Denmark figured out something most of Europe is still debating. Geography is a weapon, money is a weapon. Bureaucracy, the right kind, applied in the right choke point, is a weapon. Russia has no answer for a country that's decided to use all 3 at once. 5.9 million people. Moscow has to care what they think. That was not supposed to be possible.